Have you ever wondered, what could make a city once called the heart of the world, a fortress unbroken for more than 1,000 years, fall in a single morning? Was it destiny, or the will of one man, a 21-year-old king whose ambition redrew the borders of history? When the first cannons thundered across the Bosporus, when black smoke rose over the Theodosian Walls, did anyone fighting that day realize they were witnessing the end of an age and the birth of another world? Constantinople, the meeting place of East and West, of Christendom and Islam, of divine light and human power, had stood for over a millennium as a symbol of eternity. But on one May morning in 1453, everything changed. Who truly stood behind that moment? Was it the king celebrated as the conqueror, or a restless soul reaching for immortality? History remembers him as Sultan Mehmed II, but behind the title lies a question. Was he merely a ruler, a warrior, or a philosopher who glimpsed the limits of his own age? And when Hagia Sophia stood silent in the haze of smoke and golden dawn, did anyone truly understand that the old world had ended and a new one had begun? Join Lenora as we journey into the story of Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. Some children are born in silence, and some are born amid the echoes of destiny. Mehmed entered the world in 1432 in Edirne, the capital of the Ottoman Empire at the time, during an age when both East and West were in motion. His father, Sultan Murad II, was a seasoned warrior who had stretched the empire's borders deep into the Balkans. His mother, Huma Hatun, a noblewoman of Anatolian grace, carried both beauty and quiet strength. In the vast palace, where Persian carpets hung from marble walls and rose gardens slept beneath the morning mist, the young prince grew up among the recitations of the Quran and tales of Alexander the Great. From an early age, Mehmed was taught that he was not just a child, he was the blood of sultans, heir to the warriors who had conquered from the deserts of Arabia to the icy banks of the Danube. Yet unlike many princes of his time, Mehmed's fascination wasn't only with the sword. While other boys practiced horseback archery, he spent hours in the palace library, reading manuscripts in Greek, Arabic, and Persian. He studied the philosophy of Aristotle, the epics of Homer, and the political wisdom of Alexander. It was said that by the age of 12, he could already debate scholars about the origin of the soul and the nature of power. Murad II saw in his son something unusual, not just ambition, but an intellect as sharp as steel. He sent Mehmed to Manisa, a provincial town where princes were trained to govern. There, far from the glitter of court life, Mehmed lived in solitude, surrounded only by books, blades, and dreams. His teachers instructed him in mathematics, strategy, geography, and Sharia law. Among them was a mystic scholar, Akshemseddin, who planted in the boy's heart a belief that every king is born with a sacred mission. Mehmed's, he said, was to open the gates of the city dreamed of by two great emperors, Constantinople. It was more than a prophecy. It was a spark, one that smoldered in Mehmed's soul throughout his youth. From the windows of his residence in Manisa, he would gaze westward, where the sun sank beyond the mountains and the Marmara Sea shimmered, hiding the city he had never seen. In his imagination, Constantinople was not merely a fortress to be taken, it was a symbol of immortality, the meeting point between gods and men, between the past and the future. But fate never spares those who dream too greatly. When Mehmed was only 12, his father unexpectedly abdicated the throne, leaving the empire in the hands of a child. A boy on the throne, surrounded by veteran generals and scheming courtiers. That was how his first trial began. The Western powers, hearing of the boy's accession, quickly gathered their armies. His advisors trembled, his commanders quarreled. Amid the chaos, Mehmed sent a letter to his father, short but unforgettable. "If you are the Sultan, come and lead your army. But if I am the Sultan, then I command you to come." That letter brought Murad II back. He defeated the invaders and quietly reclaimed the throne. But from that day on, Murad understood that within his son burned the spirit of a ruler, cold and blazing all at once. And in that silent tension between father and son, between power and destiny, the conqueror was being forged. One quiet night in Edirne, the young prince stood in the palace garden, gazing westward, where the silver moon shimmered on the still waters of the Bosporus. He whispered, "One day I will open that gate." No one heard him. Only the wind moved through the towers, carrying a promise that would one day shake the world. And from that promise began the story of Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. The 15th century was an age when the world seemed to hold its breath. In the West, Rome had faded into memory. Europe was fractured by faith and war. In the East, Islamic empires rose and fell like desert winds. Between those two worlds stood the Ottoman Empire, young, ambitious, and desperate to prove itself the rightful heir of both civilizations. Yet within its heart, a quiet wind of change began to blow, gentle but unrelenting, whispering that the world was about to turn. At that time, Mehmed II was still a young man. After his father, Murad II, reclaimed the throne, Mehmed was pushed into the shadows. He no longer had power, only time. But in those forgotten years, a king was being forged. In solitude, he learned to observe. He saw the weariness of the court, old generals living off past glories, clerics drunk on authority, and distant provinces trembling under the weight of rebellion. From it all, he formed an unshakable conviction: an empire can only endure when its ruler is strong enough to make every soul bow, through intellect, not merely through the sword. Across the Bosphorus, Constantinople, once the brightest jewel of the world, was withering. The city that had once echoed with the bells of Hagia Sophia, its golden dome shining under the sun, had become a shadow of itself. The Byzantine Empire was reduced to a few miles of land, clinging to its ancient walls, sustained more by faith than by force. Emperor Constantine XI still held his crown, but around him was exhaustion. Crumbling homes, empty streets, churches filled with priests praying in despair. All of it carried a strange feeling, as if the city itself was waiting for someone to arrive and end its story. Mehmed knew. He followed the news of Constantinople through merchants, through secret letters. To him, that city was not just a military target, it was a symbol, a gate between worlds. Whoever held Constantinople would hold the fate of mankind. He saw what others did not, that a civilization collapses not when its walls fall, but when it stops believing in itself. Inside the Ottoman court, debates flared. Should they attempt to conquer Constantinople? Many commanders called it madness. The city's triple walls had repelled dozens of armies. But Mehmed stayed silent. He did not argue, he listened. Those who saw him at council meetings said his gaze seemed to pierce through the room, not looking at the maps, but at something deeper, history itself. Murad II, the father who had twice abandoned his throne, sensed the change in his son. "The boy is not like me," he once told a confidant. "He doesn't seek victory. He seeks to prove that nothing in this world is impossible." Perhaps that was why, when Murad died in 1451, Mehmed ascended the throne once more. This time, nothing could stand in his way. When news of his father's death reached him, Mehmed was silent for a long time. He did not weep nor speak. Witnesses said he climbed the tallest tower in Edirne and gazed westward, where the last light of sunset melted into the horizon. Beneath his feet lay a growing empire. But in his mind there was only one image: the Theodosian Walls, proud and unbroken, defying even time itself. At his coronation, he turned to his generals and said, "My ancestors opened the gates of the east. I will open the gates of the west." His words fell like a vow, and silence filled the hall. From that moment on, there were not one, but two Constantinoples: the city itself, and the man born to meet its destiny. And that destiny, like a rising wind, had already begun to move toward the Bosporus. No crown weighs heavier than the one a son inherits from his father. When Murad II passed away, Mehmed did not merely inherit a throne. He inherited expectations, unfinished vows, and the unseen fractures of an empire his father had held together. Murad had been a beloved ruler, a man who brought stability after decades of chaos. Yet beneath that calm surface, Mehmed sensed something else: a slowing of time, an empire standing between past and future, unsure to which it truly belonged. On the day he officially became Sultan, there were no cheers in Edirne, no grand celebration, only the cold congratulations of aging generals, the wary glances of clerics, and the whispers in the shadows. Can this boy hold the throne his father left him? Mehmed was only 21, young, quiet, unreadable. He cared little for banquets or display. He listened more than he spoke, memorizing every word, every look, as if everything before him was a chessboard, and only he knew the next move. Murad's death left a void not only in the court, but in Mehmed's soul. Though father and son had been divided by power, they were bound by blood and destiny. Murad ruled by reason, Mehmed ruled by vision. His father believed in the present. He believed in what lay beyond it. Perhaps that is why, upon taking the throne, Mehmed's first act was not to celebrate, but to order the casting of great cannons, weapons that would soon alter the course of human history. The old men of the court could not understand their new ruler. He spoke little of conquest and much of knowledge. He summoned Greek, Jewish, and Persian scholars to his palace to debate philosophy, astronomy, and military theory. Some whispered that Mehmed loved Aristotle more than the Quran, but he would only smile and say, "To understand the will of God, one must also understand the logic of man." To him, faith and intellect were not opposites. They were two paths leading to the same greatness. But knowledge alone does not sustain an empire stretching from the Balkans to Anatolia. Mehmed knew he needed more. So he began to reform the state itself, purging loyalists of the old regime, restructuring taxation, and reorganizing the elite Janissary corps, soldiers taken as children from Christian lands and raised to serve only the Sultan. Under Mehmed, the Janissaries became not just an army, but a symbol of perfect discipline, of a new order taking shape. Yet the shadow of his father still lingered. In the minds of his generals, Murad remained the model of a wise and gentle ruler. Mehmed, with his icy calm and daring ambition, inspired both reverence and fear. Some resisted him in secret, believing the young sultan was reaching too far, trying to grasp what even his ancestors had not dared. But Mehmed did not care. He understood that no greatness comes without solitude. At night, when the palace was silent, Mehmed often walked alone through the gardens of Edirne. Above him, the stars shimmered like small flames. He would gaze westward and whisper, "My father preserved peace. I will create a new world." Perhaps it was in one of those quiet moments that he made his decision, not only to conquer Constantinople, but to conquer his father's memory. And when dawn broke over the towers of the city, they saw a young sultan stepping out of the shadows, his eyes not fixed on what he already possessed, but on what he was about to change. From that morning onward, the Ottoman Empire began a new chapter, one that would not be written in ink but in steel, fire, and the unyielding will of a single man, Sultan Mehmed II. Some dreams do not begin in sleep. They begin in the moment someone dares to believe what no one else can see. For Mehmed, that dream had a name: Constantinople, the city of emperors and saints whose walls rose between two continents, like the boundary between the old world and the new. Since childhood, he had heard of it, the city Alexander the Great longed to conquer but never reached, the city where Rome had built its throne and lost it to pride. In the ancient texts he read of the Theodosian Walls, 3 layers of stone, a moat, and fortresses stretching 15 kilometers, a wall not just of earth, but of time itself. And deep within, he understood that as long as Constantinople stood, the Ottoman Empire would remain only a guest outside the gates of history. One night, while the palace slept, Mehmed sat in the library of Edirne, a flickering oil lamp casting light across an old map. On the faded parchment, thin blue lines traced the Bosporus, the Marmara Sea, and the Black Sea. He placed a finger upon the city's walls and slowly slid it southward across the water. A small gesture, yet a silent vow. "Here," he whispered, "is where I will open the door to the new world." Few understood his obsession. To many, Constantinople was sacred, the holy city of Christendom, the dwelling place of God and his saints. But to Mehmed, it was destiny. Conquest, to him, was not desecration, it was completion. He believed he was not defying history, but fulfilling it. 2 great emperors, Caesar and Alexander, dreamed of this, he said. I have come only to finish their promise. To bring that dream to life, Mehmed began to act like a man who could already see the future. He ordered the construction of Rumeli Hisarı, a fortress on the European shore of the Bosporus, directly facing Anadolu Hisarı, which his father had built years before. Together the 2 fortresses clenched the strait like a pair of fists, symbols of control over the lifeline between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Merchants from Genoa, Venice, and Byzantium understood the message clearly. The Sultan was closing his hand around Constantinople. Inside the city, unease spread. Priests urged the people to pray. Emperor Constantine XI sent desperate letters across Europe begging for aid. But the West was divided between the Pope and the kings, between faith and politics. Everyone knew that aiding Byzantium meant challenging an empire that grew stronger by the day. And so the ancient city was left alone, like an island drifting in the sea of time. Meanwhile, in Edirne, the sound of hammers echoed day and night from the foundries. A Hungarian engineer named Orban came before Mehmed, carrying blueprints for an enormous cannon capable of firing stone balls the weight of oxen. No one had ever dared imagine such a weapon. When Mehmed examined the design, he said simply, "Build it. You will have everything you need." The engineer bowed, and months later the great cannon, Basilica, was born, hauled by hundreds of oxen and soldiers. News spread across Europe. Some were horrified, others doubted. But Mehmed sought no approval. He knew that history does not wait for the hesitant. Their walls are built of stone, he told his generals. Our weapon is forged of will. Within the palace, scholars debated whether attacking Constantinople could be justified before God. Mehmed smiled and replied, God stands with those who act. And so, the dream began to take form. No longer a vision in the night, but a plan in the daylight. Craftsmen, soldiers, engineers, scholars, all were summoned. Roads were repaired for the movement of artillery, forges blazed through the night, and the maps of the empire filled with marks and strategies. It was as if an entire civilization had drawn in one great breath, ready to exhale. On the final night before the campaign, Mehmed stepped out of his tent and gazed at the moon hanging above the strait, suspended between two worlds. He whispered, "If that city is the gate of the world, then I will be the one to open it, not through hatred, not for glory, but through destiny." And when the spring of 1453 arrived, it came with the beating of drums, the trembling of the earth, and a vow that no power could silence. The vow that Constantinople would no longer remain a legend. Before the siege began, Constantinople still held the beauty of a world long gone, like a fading jewel casting its final light before it disappears. The city stood between two continents, embraced by the waters of the Marmara and the Bosporus, its golden domes of Hagia Sophia still glimmering beneath the dawn. Yet, as Mehmed prepared his campaign, that city, the very heart of Byzantium, had grown old, weary, and more alone than ever before. Each morning, the people of Constantinople woke to the sound of church bells, walking through cobbled streets where grass now grew between the cracks. On the towering walls, guards peered toward the hazy horizon and saw the distant red glow of Ottoman campfires. But inside the city, the faithful still prayed. For them, faith was the last thread holding their crumbling world together. Emperor Constantine XI, Palaiologos, the final emperor of Eastern Rome, was no weak man. He had fought, he had ruled, and he knew that his dynasty was nearing its end. Yet within him burned something unyielding: pride. When Mehmed's envoys delivered a letter demanding surrender in exchange for his life, Constantine replied, "To hand over this city would be to betray my ancestors. I shall die with it." The city once called Nova Roma, the New Rome, had been the bridge between Christian faith and imperial power, between ancient Greece and the medieval world. But by 1453, Constantinople's defenders numbered fewer than 10,000. Many were citizens and some were priests who had laid down their robes to wield spears beside the soldiers. Along the Theodosian Walls they patched gaps with wood and earth, sealing cracks with stones pulled from ruins. They knew they could not win, but they stood anyway for honor. Inside the churches, priests held vigil through the night. Candles flickered as the people prayed to the Virgin to protect her city. In the squares, elders told children that Constantinople will never fall, that God will send his angels to save us. And beneath the hymns and incense, none realized they were singing the requiem of their own city. Beyond the walls, in the Ottoman camp, Mehmed II did not sleep either. He walked among thousands of tents, the torchlight trembling in the wind. It was not merely an army, it was a world in motion. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers gathered from across the empire, Turks, Arabs, Albanians, Bosnians, even former Christians, now serving as janissaries under the Sultan's banner. In the glow of the fires, Mehmed looked toward the distant domes of the city, shining faintly in the moonlight. He whispered to his aide, "Tonight they pray." So do I. For in his heart, Mehmed did not see this as conquest, but destiny. He believed he was continuing the legacy of Caesar and Constantine the Great, chosen to unite two worlds, East and West, Islam and Christendom, past and future. In a note later recorded, he was said to have declared, "I will not destroy this city. I will give it a new soul." Days passed in uneasy silence. Both sides knew that time favored neither. Inside the walls, food dwindled. Outside, the Ottomans built towers, dug trenches, and positioned their cannons. Each night, from the northern ramparts, the defenders heard the rhythmic pounding of metal into earth, the heartbeat of fate itself. Constantine XI continued his rounds along the walls, speaking with the weary soldiers, clasping their hands. Once he paused to look toward the Ottoman camp, where hundreds of fires burned like fallen stars. "We are few," he said softly, "but we have God." A soldier bowed and replied, trembling, "And you have us." It was the city's last peaceful night. For when the sun rose, the first thunder of cannon fire would shatter the silence. Sounds the world had never heard before. And as those massive iron spheres crashed against the Theodosian Walls, it was not only stone that broke, but 1,000 years of history that began to fracture. In that dawn light, witnesses said Constantinople was still beautiful, like a prayer cast into the wind. But every prayer must pass through silence. And that silence was exactly what Mehmed II had been waiting for his entire life. When the spring of 1453 arrived, the air in Edirne was heavy with iron and smoke. The dirt roads leading to the river docks were scarred with the tracks of soldiers, horses, wagons, and endless lines of labourers hauling timber, stone, and gunpowder. The Ottoman Empire had awakened, not with shouts or fanfare, but with the steady heartbeat of hundreds of thousands moving toward a single purpose: Constantinople. By then, Mehmed II was no longer the quiet prince who once read by lamplight. He was a man forged in solitude and fire, a ruler who understood that destiny never waits for the hesitant. It was said that before departing Edirne, he entered the mosque alone, knelt in silence for a long time, and then rose to speak just one sentence: "When I return, the world will be different." His preparations were meticulous, down to the smallest detail. 300 warships assembled at Gallipoli, dozens of massive cannons were newly forged, and hundreds of thousands of men marched to the rhythm of drums. But what set Mehmed apart was not mere power, it was vision. He thought not only like a warrior, but like an architect of history. He knew he was not just breaking a city's walls. He was knocking on the door of a new age. The older generals were uneasy. They had seen countless armies perish at the foot of the Theodosian Walls. They urged caution, diplomacy, delay. Mehmed only smiled. "No door opens to those who beg," he said, "only to the hand that dares to knock." When the great army began its march, the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. Crimson banners fluttered in the wind, bearing the silver crescent, symbol of the empire and shadow of the night soon to fall upon the city. Columns of janissaries advanced in silence, their armor gleaming, their discipline cold as stone. At the center rode Mehmed, black cloak, white turban, his face calm, unreadable. Witnesses said his eyes reflected the sea itself, deep and impossible to predict. As the army neared the Bosporus, Mehmed ordered a halt upon a hill. From there, the domes of the distant city could be seen, catching the light of dawn. He watched in silence before turning to his commander, Zaganos Pasha. "That is where my empire will begin, and where theirs will end." To ensure victory, Mehmed devised one of the boldest maneuvers of the Middle Ages, dragging an entire fleet of warships across land. When the Byzantines sealed the strait with a massive iron chain, Mehmed commanded that logs be laid down and coated with grease. Under the cover of night, more than 70 ships were hauled over the hills of Galata, gliding across the earth like silent ghosts of iron. By morning, the people of Constantinople awoke to see Ottoman flags fluttering above the waters of the Golden Horn, a place they believed untouchable. That silence weighed heavier than cannon fire. It was a message. Nothing is impossible. In the camp, Mehmed lived simply. He ate with his soldiers, slept among them, and each night inspected the guns, the supply lines, and the troops himself. Officers noted that he never raised his voice, never repeated an order. "A leader," he once said, "must be quiet as steel, for steel does not speak to cut." Yet behind that stillness was a restless mind. He calculated wind direction, soil moisture, and the arc of cannonballs. Engineers recalled how he personally measured the distance to the walls and adjusted the guns with his own hands. And when the great cannon basilica fired for the first time, its thunder shook not just the ground, but the limits of human possibility. Inside the city, panic spread. Each day, another section of the wall collapsed. Smoke and dust filled the sky. Yet the defenders fought on and prayed. Mehmed watched it all without wavering. "No one," he said, "is born to end an empire without creating another." Every evening as the sun set over the Bosporus, he stood watching the city. Not with the eyes of a conqueror, but of a man waiting for eternity to arrive. He knew that when those walls finally fell, not just an empire would die, but history itself would change course forever. In those days, it seemed the entire world had only two heartbeats. One of Constantinople, heavy, fading, and one of Mehmed, calm, but unstoppable. Because destiny, once it begins to walk, never turns back. News of the siege of Constantinople spread across Europe like a cold wind. From Venice to Rome, from Paris to Vienna, kings and popes alike were shaken, though not all with fear. Some doubted, some simply did not care. Europe had grown used to endless border wars, to promises of new crusades that never came to pass. They heard that Mehmed II was marching west, but few believed that a 21-year-old could accomplish what hundreds of armies had failed to do for 1,000 years. In Rome, Pope Nicholas V gathered his advisors. Their debates stretched through long nights, not over faith, but over politics. Who would pay for a crusade? Who would lead it? Who would guard their own borders if the Ottomans struck? And as always, division triumphed. In Venice, merchants looked east, not to fight, but to calculate. If Constantinople falls, they said, the Silk Road will pass through Mehmed's hands, and perhaps that means profit. In Hungary and Wallachia, frontier soldiers received the news in silence. They knew that if the city fell, the Ottomans would come for them next. Yet no one dared move. Who could stand against the destiny of a rising empire? While Europe hesitated, only a few letters crossed the Adriatic, warnings to Mehmed, "Do not offend the city of God," but he merely smiled. "They call it God's city," he said, "yet they've left it alone." There was no mockery in his tone, only a cold observation of human nature. He understood that victory does not belong to the strong, but to those who still believe when others have stopped believing. Perhaps what terrified the West was not Mehmed's armies, but his mind. He did not act like an Eastern despot, but like a strategist with the intellect of Rome itself. He could write in Greek, read Latin, and understood the culture of his enemies, which made him far more dangerous than any weapon. An Italian monk once wrote, "He is a strange fusion of Alexander and Hannibal, the mind of a philosopher and the heart of a conqueror. Meanwhile, inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI waited. He sent envoys to Genoa, Venice, Naples, even Rome, pleading for aid. But the replies were empty promises. Only a small contingent of Genoese soldiers arrived, joined by a handful of merchants carrying crossbows and powder. The city of saints now depended on the loyalty of strangers, and through it all, Mehmed remained calm. He built observation towers, adjusted the range of his guns, and ordered floating bridges to encircle the city from the sea. He knew that with every passing day, the Byzantines grew weaker, and Europe more divided. One night, his spies reported that Emperor Constantine planned a grand ceremony, a final prayer for deliverance. When Mehmed heard this, he replied softly, "I do not pray for miracles. I create them." The words spread through the camp like fire. Soldiers cheered and generals exchanged glances, realizing they followed a man who believed not in chance, but in human will. Under the torchlight, Mehmed stood silent, staring toward the distant walls. He knew that behind them was a world holding its breath, and that in a single morning he could change it forever. Europe had sent its warnings, but history has never known how to retreat. For when an empire is being born, no faith on earth can stop it. And as dawn approached, the first drums of the greatest siege of the Middle Ages began to beat. Slow, steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. April 1453. The plains of Thrace were thick with dust and smoke. The sky burned gold, as if forged in fire, and the ground trembled beneath the wooden wheels that bore the Ottoman cannons forward. The army of Mehmed II had arrived, not as a mere force of men, but as a storm with memory, driven by faith, discipline, and the iron will of one man, Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. By the time the vanguard reached the northern walls of Constantinople, the sun had already set beyond the Bosporus. Before them rose the Theodosian Walls, immense, silent, like a mountain of stone built by the gods themselves. Thousands of Ottoman torches reflected off the white marble, making the sleeping city glow like a colossal lighthouse against the night. The soldiers stared upward and wondered if what they saw was the work of men or of heaven. Mehmed rode to the front lines. The silver moonlight glinted off his black armor and white turban. He halted, gazing upon the city at rest, and whispered, "From this moment, every stone you see is a chapter in our destiny." The words spread among his officers, then through the ranks, a vow that none dared forget. At dawn, the first cannon fire broke the silence. It was a sound the world had never known, not the clash of swords or the beat of drums, but the roar of a new age. Massive iron balls screamed through the air, crashing into the walls in showers of flame and dust. The city shook. People fled into the squares, weeping, clinging to one another as the church bells rang without pause, their Latin and Greek prayers rising into the chaos. They knew the war had truly begun. Yet, in the Ottoman camp, life moved with the calm rhythm of purpose. Janissaries stood in perfect formation, artillerymen worked through day and night, and before each shot, prayers were recited, not as pleas, but as offerings to the god of war. Mehmed walked among them, his gaze steady, his voice low. He knew that true strength did not lie in one strike, but in endurance. After several days, cracks began to appear along the outer walls. Stones tumbled like rain, but the Byzantines filled the gaps with wood, mud, and even the bodies of their dead. Within the city, Emperor Constantine XI still inspired his men with words and faith. Dressed in armor, he climbed the ramparts himself. "This is our city," he declared. "If it must fall, then let it fall with us." Priests carried crosses along the walls, sprinkling holy water over the trembling stones. Inside Hagia Sophia, candles burned beneath the golden dome, light flickering through clouds of incense. The people prayed, unaware that outside, Mehmed was counting every shot, every hour, every heartbeat of the dying empire. He understood that to conquer Constantinople was not just to break its walls, but to shatter the faith that had stood for 1,000 years. So he waited. He attacked, then stopped, then attacked again, testing not the walls, but the spirit behind them. Some nights he ordered the drums to thunder until dawn, denying the defenders sleep. Other nights he commanded absolute silence, letting fear do his work. Between the two sides stretched endless days of smoke, dust, and blood. The fields became graveyards, rivers turned red with ash and flesh, but neither side yielded. One misty morning, Mehmed paused beside the great cannon basilica. He placed his hand upon the cold barrel and murmured, "If their walls are their vow, then this shall be my answer." Then he gave the order. Fire. The blast tore through the air like a god's thunder. The earth quaked, and the ancient walls split anew. From that day on, each sunrise was marked by cannon fire. Black smoke curled into the sky like strange clouds over the Marmara, and within that haze, the shape of destiny began to emerge, the fate of a city and of two worlds. For this was no longer a siege, it was a passage between faith and reason, between the medieval and the modern, between a dying empire and one being born. And at the heart of it all stood a young man, calm as stone, whose eyes did not look toward victory, but toward history itself unfolding beneath his feet. The sound of cannon fire changed everything. It did not merely tear through the air, it shattered the very idea of what war had always been. From the days of Alexander to Caesar, city walls had symbolized the unbreakable, the line dividing the civilized from the wild. But in the spring of 1453, beneath the walls of Constantinople, that idea began to crumble under the hands of a young man and a weapon humankind had never seen before. The cannon. The basilica, the monstrous bronze weapon forged by the Hungarian engineer Orban, stretched 8 meters long and weighed tens of tons. To move it required 60 oxen, hundreds of soldiers, and 4 days for every mile. But to Mehmed II, it was not a burden. It was a symbol. Each time the cannon was loaded, he was there. Witnesses said he would rest his hand on its barrel, close his eyes for a moment, and then command, "Fire." The thunder that followed, he said, was the voice of a new age. The enormous iron balls hurtled toward the Theodosian Walls with terrifying speed, striking with such force that the earth itself seemed to tremble. At first, the Byzantines mocked him. "These walls have stood for 1,000 years. What cannon could bring them down?" But soon they watched stones collapse, towers fracture, and a silence spread across the city like a shadow. Fear crept into Constantinople. People could no longer sleep. Each time the cannons roared, they rushed to Hagia Sophia, lighting candles, praying, weeping. The priests read the scriptures louder and louder, yet the voice of the cannon drowned them all. Every blast was a reminder. The age of miracles was ending, and the age of men had begun. Mehmed understood that better than anyone. He did not fire merely to destroy walls. He fired to plant despair. He changed the rhythm of bombardment, sometimes relentless, sometimes silent, so the defenders never knew when death would come. At night, The glow of Ottoman campfires painted the city's ramparts red as blood, reflecting upon the domes of Hagia Sophia, where prayers still echoed through the smoke. But the basilica was far from perfect. Often it overheated, cracked, even exploded, killing gunners and engineers alike. Each time a man died, Mehmed ordered a proper burial and said quietly, "No progress is born without blood." He never looked at the corpses, only at the wall ahead, where the old empire clung desperately to its illusion of eternity. The Byzantines fought back fiercely. They patched walls, hurled fire, poured boiling oil, and even dropped iron nets to catch the cannonballs. But they knew they were fighting not merely against men, but against the evolution of the world itself. A monk recorded, "We hear thunder from the earth, not from the heavens, from the hands of men who have learned to imitate the gods." Indeed, under Mehmed's command, war was no longer glory, it was science. He calculated firing angles, measured humidity, timed rest for the foundrymen, and ordered gunpowder magazines built far from the camps to prevent explosions. Every detail was managed as though he were directing not an army but a machine. A new kind of empire, one powered by intellect. When one of his generals asked, "My Sultan, when the walls fall, shall we enter as warriors or as destroyers?" Mehmed replied, "We shall enter as rebirth." The words fell like prophecy, for he did not see himself as a destroyer, but as a liberator. After more than 3 weeks, the outer walls of Constantinople were cracked and bleeding, their stones dry and scarred like the skin of a dying desert. Inside, Emperor Constantine XI still stood tall, but he knew he was fighting something beyond human strength, the weight of a new era. One night, under the rising moon, Mehmed ordered a pause in the bombardment. He rode to the riverbank, gazed at the moon reflected upon the water, and whispered, "Tomorrow the sun will rise upon 2 worlds, one dying, one being born." The wind swept across the ruined fields. On one side, Ottoman soldiers sang their prayers in Arabic. On the other, the Byzantines chanted hymns in Greek. 2 voices, 2 faiths, blending in the night like a farewell between ages. And when dawn broke, the cannons roared again, tearing not only through walls, but through the boundary between centuries. From that day onward, no one could ever say that war was the same, for on that morning the world entered the age of gunpowder, of iron, and of those who dared to challenge eternity itself. Mid-May 1453. Constantinople sat like a tiny oasis surrounded by an ocean of iron. The Theodosian Walls still stood, stubborn against time, but cracked and bleeding. Every stone blackened by gunpowder smoke, every corner of the rampart a fresh grave. Inside and outside those walls, 2 worlds lived side by side, one waiting for a miracle, the other shaping its own destiny. Within the city, life went on as if people were trying to keep the last threads of order from unraveling. Children ran to fetch water along the cobbled lanes, elders sat and read their prayers, craftsmen patched roofs shattered by cannon fire. Yet the air itself had changed. Every small sound made people startle. From Hagia Sophia, the hymns never stopped, echoing through the streets, holy and unbearably sad. Emperor Constantine XI kept his courage. He rode the walls himself, speaking to squads of soldiers, clasping hands, steadying them with his calm presence. People said he never showed fear, even when great sections of wall tumbled. He would say, "This is the land of our fathers. If it must fall, I will fall with it." Those words brought many to tears and steeled their grips upon weapons, as though embracing the last measure of pride they had left. Outside the walls, in the Ottoman camp, the world was different. There, everything ran by a cold, absolute order. The Janissaries drilled each morning in silence, only the clang of armor and the cadence of commands. The gunners worked in shifts, cleaning barrels, remeasuring angles, loading and firing. Each motion was practiced like ritual. In their eyes, Mehmed was not merely a king, he was the one chosen to open a new age. At night, lanterns burned like a ring of fire around the city. From inside, those lights trembled like 1,000 demonic eyes. To the Ottoman army, they were the light of victory near at hand. Mehmed walked among the camps, inspecting each cannon, each palisade, each line of men. He told them, "Each flame is a star. When all the stars join, the night will end." Sometimes he stood on a hill watching the sleeping city. Moonlight washed the dome of Hagia Sophia, making it glow like a jewel dulled by dust. In those moments, so witnesses say, Mehmed fell silent for a long time and then breathed, "So beautiful it should not be destroyed but brought back to life." Yet mercy did not soften his reason. He knew that if the city would not yield, blood would be spilled. He sent one last envoy into Constantinople with a final demand. "Surrender the city in peace and all lives will be spared, all churches left intact. Resist and you will suffer the fate history hands down." Emperor Constantine read the message, folded it, and answered, "God entrusted this city to me. I do not have the right to hand it to another." The envoy bowed and left in silence. When the news reached Mehmed, he showed no anger and gave no immediate order to fire. He said only, "Then they have chosen their road. I will follow mine to the end." From that moment, the days were no longer simply assault. They became the final chapters of a civilization. Cannon thunder mixed with the sound of prayer. Blade on stone answered the tolling of church bells. The sky filled with smoke, yet when the wind shifted, sometimes a lone bird would cross the clouded air, as if history itself watched but would not intervene. Both sides understood that destiny was arriving. No one any longer trusted miracles, and yet no one would yield. One world was dying, another was being born, and both breathed the same air, separated only by a wall. As the night of May 28th fell, the sky over Constantinople was darker than any before. Inside the city, priests performed last vigils. Outside, Mehmed ordered his troops to prepare for the general assault. He looked toward the walls, not merely as an adversary, but as someone standing at the threshold of history. Tomorrow he knew the world would not be the same. The night of May 28th, 1453. The plains of Thrace lay still, as if the entire universe had stopped to hold its breath. The sky was thick with clouds, and the wind carried the damp breath of the Marmara Sea across the Ottoman camps. In the dim, red light of torches, hundreds of thousands of soldiers sat in silence, hands gripping weapons, waiting for the final command. No one spoke. Only the distant neigh of horses and the crash of waves broke the quiet. At the center of the encampment, Mehmed II stood before his command tent. Dressed in black armor and a white cloak, his face was calm, the face of a man who had already seen what was to come. His generals knelt before him, receiving their last orders. Mehmed's voice was low, but steady. "Tonight, we are not merely taking a city. We are stepping into history. Those who fall will live forever in glory. Those who prevail will reshape the destiny of mankind." His words spread through the army like a current of fire. On the northern hills, lines of Janissaries stood motionless, silver armor gleaming faintly, eyes fixed on the distant walls. where Byzantine torches flickered like stars on the verge of dying. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI remained awake. He wore his armor, carried a cross, and walked through Hagia Sophia alongside his priests. Beneath the golden dome, thousands knelt together, praying, weeping, singing hymns. There was no longer hope of survival, only the wish to die with grace. Constantine spoke softly. "Brothers, I am no longer your emperor, but a soldier of Christ. When dawn comes, if I am gone, remember that I fought for this place, for faith and for dignity." Then he left the church and ascended the walls. The night was thick as ink. He looked out toward the Ottoman lines, a sea of torches stretching to the horizon. Some said he smiled faintly. Turning to Giustiniani, his Genoese commander, he whispered, "They are many, but the angels are enough for us." Around 3 in the morning, the war drums began, deep, slow, relentless, the heartbeat of the earth itself. Arrows rose into the sky, flashing like falling stars. Then came the thunder of the cannons. The ground shook, the outer walls burst apart, stone and flame exploding upward. The Ottoman tide surged forward, black and roaring. Shouts of Allahu Akbar mingled with the toll of church bells, the screams, the clash of steel, and the weeping of a dying empire. That night, Constantinople blazed like the end of the world, beautiful and terrible all at once. At the gate of St. Romanus, Constantine fought at the breach. He and his men resisted until their strength gave out. An arrow struck his shoulder, but he kept fighting, shouting, "Better to die for the city than live in disgrace." When the Ottomans flooded through, he vanished into the chaos. His body was never found. Legend says he turned to stone, buried deep beneath the city, waiting for the day Constantinople rises again. By sunrise, the smoke hung heavy over the ruins. The noise of battle faded. The Byzantine army was spent. The gates stood open. After 7 weeks of siege, the eternal city had fallen. Mehmed rode through the gate on horseback. He did not cheer, did not raise his sword. He bowed his head in silence, gazing upon the ashes of an age. He ordered the killing to stop, civilians to be spared, and churches protected. Then he dismounted and walked, slowly, through the rubble-strewn streets, to Hagia Sophia. The great doors opened. Inside, the air was thick with incense and smoke. Priests and townspeople knelt, trembling. Mehmed stood still. Light from the dome poured down upon his face, and his shadow stretched across the ancient floor. He spoke softly, so quietly that only those near him heard. "No one can stand against time, but I can make time begin again." In that moment, history changed course. The Byzantine Empire, symbol of the old world, was gone. A new empire was born, with Istanbul as its heart. The night of blood and fire ended, and the dawn of a new world began. Morning of May 29th, 1453. The world seemed to stop breathing. The streets that once echoed with prayers, trade, and the toll of church bells now carried only the measured footsteps of Ottoman soldiers. Sunlight fell upon burned domes and rising smoke from shattered homes. Overhead, hundreds of gulls circled Hagia Sophia, as if nature itself had come to witness the turning of an age. The city was silent, not with peace, but with transition. One empire had ended, and another had just begun to breathe. That morning, Mehmed II rode through the gate of St. Romanus, the place that had been a storm of fire and blood only hours before. He said nothing. His soldiers said nothing. Only the slow rhythm of hooves struck the stones. When they reached the central square, he stopped. Before him lay ruin, smoke, and tears, all woven together. And through it all, Hagia Sophia still stood, its dome blackened with soot, yet unbroken. Mehmed dismounted, walking slowly across the cobblestones toward the great wooden doors of the church. He paused, looked up at the darkened dome, and bowed his head. The doors opened, and a rush of incense and ash spilled out, the breath of a vanished world. Inside, citizens knelt trembling, afraid to raise their eyes. A few priests clutched their crosses, their lips quivering, but silent. Mehmed entered, with only a handful of guards. In the center of the hall, where sunlight fell through the dome, he said softly, "No one is to touch this place. From now on, it will be protected as a house of God." He ordered that Hagia Sophia be converted into a mosque, but not destroyed. The mosaics, the gold, and the icons of Christianity were to be covered, not smashed. In that act, Mehmed revealed more than mercy. He revealed understanding. He knew that a true empire is not built by erasing the past, but by transforming it into the foundation of what comes next. Outside, Ottoman soldiers gathered the dead, set up tents, and distributed food to the surviving citizens. Some looting still erupted, but when word reached the Sultan, he issued a severe command: "Whoever harms the innocent is a traitor." By noon, several soldiers were executed at the city gates as a warning. Order returned quickly, as if the city itself had merely woken from a nightmare. That afternoon, Mehmed climbed a hill overlooking the sea and the newly conquered city. The wind pulled at his cloak as the red sunset flared over the Marmara. One of his generals said, "My Sultan, Constantinople is yours." Mehmed gazed across the skyline and replied, "No. From today, I belong to the city." He renamed it Istanbul, from the Greek Is ten Polin, meaning to the city. The old name was not erased, but reborn in a new tongue. Under his reign, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and Arabs were invited back to rebuild and live together. He envisioned a capital where East met West, where faith met knowledge. That night, when the city finally quieted, Mehmed sat alone in his tent. He wrote a few short lines in his journal. "I have opened the gates of history. But as I stepped through, I ceased to be the conqueror. I became the one tested." Outside, the wind swept across the dome of Hagia Sophia, where moonlight glowed upon the cold marble. No more cries, no more guns, only a strange stillness, the stillness of a world that had lost its old soul and awaited a new one to take its place. From that moment onward, Constantinople was no longer the capital of Byzantium. It became the heart of the Ottoman Empire, where God, mankind, and history met in the quiet dawn after the storm. The first day, May 30th, 1453. The wind blew from both directions, one current carrying the salt of the Marmara, another the cold breath of the Balkans. Standing atop the Theodosian Walls, Mehmed II paused, feeling both at once. To the east lay the lands of his Islamic forebears, to the west the legacy of Rome and Greece. In that moment, perhaps he understood. He was not merely the Sultan of the Ottomans, but the ruler of two worlds. After conquering Constantinople, Mehmed did not drown in triumph. There were no parades, no boasts. Instead, he began what few conquerors ever did. He rebuilt. Within months, the ruins were cleared, markets reopened, streets repaved with stone, and refugees summoned home. His decree was simple: whoever wishes to live and work in this city, Greek, Armenian, Jew, or Persian, is welcome. To Mehmed, Istanbul would not merely be the capital of an empire, but the center of humanity itself. He walked through neighborhoods, listening to survivors speak of loss. Some wept, others bowed silently. None were expelled. He ordered the reconstruction of the Grand Bazaar, the rebuilding of the Galata Bridge, and invited craftsmen from across the world to restore the city. "I have taken the city by the sword," he said. "Now I must hold it by life." To the Muslim world he was Sultan al-Ghazi, the warrior of faith. To the West he called himself Kaiser-i-Rum, Caesar of Rome. It was not arrogance, but declaration. Mehmed believed himself the heir of Rome and Byzantium, the one destined to reunite the two halves of the world long divided. When the Pope heard this, he was furious. That a Muslim sultan dared call himself Caesar was unthinkable. But Mehmed did not care. To him, empire did not belong to one religion, but to those with mind and courage. Upon his imperial seal he had inscribed, in both Arabic and Greek, "By the will of God, I am ruler of East and West." In the palace he built, Topkapi, cultures intertwined, Byzantine columns, Islamic domes, Persian gardens. Every stone spoke of unity. During his banquets, scholars gathered from every corner of the known world: Athens, Cairo, Damascus, Florence. One Greek philosopher once asked, "Do you wish to be remembered as a conqueror or as a thinker?" Mehmed smiled, as the one who made the two the same. But power, he knew, rested not only on steel and learning. It needed symbols. He minted new coins engraved with the crescent and star, signs of an empire entering the age of light. He issued laws protecting Christians and Jews, allowing them to keep their faiths. "You cannot conquer a soul with fear," he said, "only with justice." Those words astonished friend and foe alike. A young sultan who had captured the greatest Christian city now spoke with the voice of a philosopher. But that was Mehmed's essence, not only to rule, but to understand. One evening, standing on the terrace of his palace, gazing over the Marmara Sea, Mehmed said to a trusted vizier, "From this day, every road will lead to Istanbul. But remember, an empire that stands between two worlds must guard two things: peace and wisdom." Under his reign, schools spread across the empire, astronomers flourished, and the royal library became one of the largest in Europe. In its quiet halls, Greek scholars translated Aristotle into Arabic, while Persian teachers lectured on mathematics and astronomy to Ottoman students. And under the soft flicker of oil lamps, one could sometimes see Mehmed himself, the same man who once broke the walls of Constantinople, now sitting among manuscripts, reading ancient texts in silence. Perhaps in that silence he realized he had conquered more than a city. He had conquered ignorance, with knowledge the only weapon capable of outliving empires. For in Mehmed's heart, victory was never an ending. It was the beginning of a greater mission, to unite humankind in a single city where East and West could see their reflection in the shared light of faith and reason. The rebirth of a city, 1453. The city had just survived its death throes. Houses stood as skeletons, church domes cracked, and the streets lay buried under a thick skin of ash. Yet Mehmed II did not see ruins. He saw the shape of the future. In the mind of the young Sultan, Istanbul began to live again the very moment he stepped into Hagia Sophia. In the days that followed the conquest, he gathered generals, scholars, and builders around a vast city map spread upon the floor. Streets, districts, and harbours were marked in white chalk. "We will not rebuild a city," he said. "We will raise the heart of the world." His tone was calm, but every word struck with the weight of iron. Mehmed knew that to keep Constantinople, he had to make it breathe again, not through fear, but through life. He reopened the markets, restored the ports, repaired the Galata Bridge so that goods from 3 continents could flow once more. Merchants returned from Persia, Armenia, Egypt, even Genoa and Venice. To their eyes, Istanbul was no longer merely the Ottoman capital. It was becoming the crossroads of East and West. Then came the most unexpected act of all. He called the people home. From across the empire, decrees were sent inviting Greeks, Jews, Armenians, and Arabs to settle in the city. Each community was granted its own quarter, its own laws, under a single, just administration. A great city, Mehmed said, is not built of stone, but of people. To rekindle its soul, he raised monuments of vision. On the highest hill overlooking the Marmara, he built Topkapi Saraya, not only a royal palace, but a center of governance, learning, and art. Its white walls, domes, and rose gardens stretched like poetry carved in stone. Schools, libraries, and public baths soon followed. For Mehmed, a strong empire required more than armies. It needed knowledge and cleanliness, symbols of civilization itself. Under his rule, Ottoman architects studied the ruins of Byzantium, how domes caught the light, how space could feel divine. From this marriage of influence was born Ottoman architecture, the solemn grace of the East blended with the harmony of the West. Each brick laid was a declaration that the world could unite without conquest. Yet Mehmed's concern extended beyond stone and wood. He cared for memory. When advisors urged him to demolish Byzantine ruins for new buildings, he refused. "If we destroy the past," he said, "the future will stand upon sand." Thus the ancient mosaics of Hagia Sophia were covered with plaster, not broken, preserved in silence for the centuries to come. Within his new palace, Mehmed created a house of learning. There, Arab mathematicians debated Greek philosophers, Persian astronomers charted the stars for Turkish students. At night, oil lamps glowed through the courtyards, a light that spilled over the palace walls, shimmering across the sea, whispering that knowledge too could shine like a sword. One morning, standing on the terrace of Topkapi and looking over the Golden Horn, Mehmed said to his vizier, "When I came, this city was dead. Now it breathes again. But remember, if we do not feed it with justice, it will sleep once more in ashes." And so he created the Kanun, a civil code to balance the Sharia, protecting merchants, non-Muslims, and property rights, an idea far ahead of his time. Under his governance, Istanbul reclaimed its ancient rhythm, a hub of commerce, culture, and learning. Ships from Alexandria, Venice, Trebizond, and Crimea crowded its harbors. In its markets, Greek mingled with Turkish, Arabic with Armenian, a living symphony of diversity. And one evening, as the last rays of sunlight glimmered on Hagia Sophia's dome, Mehmed stood, watching the blue smoke rise from the city's new chimneys. He whispered, "This city belongs neither to me nor to them. It belongs to those who believe that from ruin, humanity can be reborn." From the ashes of Constantinople, Istanbul was born, not as a new city, but as a soul resurrected from its own memory. And under the hands of Mehmed II, that heart began to beat once more, not only for an empire, but for all of humankind. After the war, the empire of the mind. The fires of war had barely faded when the Ottoman Empire began to breathe again. Yet what astonished the world was not how swiftly Mehmed II rebuilt Constantinople, but how he governed it. At a time when Europe was torn apart by religious wars, the young Sultan spent his days not in conquest, but in learning. In the Topkapi Palace, Mehmed was rarely seen upon his throne. More often, he sat cross-legged among stacks of manuscripts. He read through the night the Quran, Greek philosophy, Persian poetry, and Roman epics. he spoke 5 languages: Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, and Latin. When he conversed with Western scholars, he used their own tongue, quoting Aristotle and Ptolemy, until they could no longer decide whether they were speaking to a king or a philosopher. Mehmed believed that true power did not lie in the sword, but in the mind. He once said, "An empire ruled by the sword will die by the sword, but one built upon knowledge will outlive time itself." Guided by that conviction, he sought wisdom wherever it could be found, regardless of creed or origin. He invited Byzantine scholars, once servants of the fallen emperor, to teach at his court. Those who had once called him an enemy became his friends, partners in dialogue within the new empire. The discussions inside Topkapi were unlike anything the world had seen. Muslim theologians debated Christian philosophers. Persian mathematicians solved equations alongside Jewish scholars, and Mehmed sat among them, listening, sometimes interrupting, with a question sharp as steel. He did not seek praise, why, he sought truth. "Truth," he said, "has no religion, only those brave enough to face it." His passion for learning took physical form in the institutions he built. He founded the Fatih Madrasa, a great academy where philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and law were taught side by side. Thousands of students came from every province of the empire. Sometimes, late at night, the Sultan himself would visit the classrooms, walking quietly between rows of students. Once, seeing a boy bent over a geometry problem, Mehmed asked, "Do you know how to measure the length of a river?" The boy shook his head. Mehmed smiled. "One day you will. But remember, measuring a river is easier than measuring the human heart." Mehmed was not only a student, he was a poet. Under the pen name Avni, he wrote in Persian, verses of love, loneliness, and the yearning for eternity. A poet once said of him, "When he holds a sword, the world trembles. When he holds a pen, the world falls silent." In one poem, Mehmed wrote, "I sought the meaning of life in war, but only in words did I find peace." From his writings emerges a man of contradiction, one who conquered the world yet feared it might be too small for his mind. Beneath the armor of the conqueror lay the soul of a dreamer. Perhaps it was that tension between power and reflection that made him unforgettable. When European envoys arrived in Istanbul, they expected to meet a tyrant. Instead, they found a ruler eager to speak of philosophy, art, and the structure of the cosmos. A Venetian ambassador once wrote, "This king does not wish to rule lands. He wishes to rule knowledge itself." Mehmed's fascination with the stars was legendary. He summoned astrologers from Samarkand and Cairo, building an observatory on the banks of the Bosporus. There he spent hours gazing at the heavens, asking about the paths of planets and the shape of the earth. When told that some believed the earth was round, he did not rage as others might. Instead, he asked, "If the earth is round, does that not mean the light of God can reach all of it?" That openness, fearless of the unknown, humble before discovery, set the Ottoman Empire apart. While Europe still struggled in the shadow of dogma and war, Mehmed transformed Istanbul into a sanctuary of human thought, a mirror where East and West could recognize one another. Yet, intellect never made him forget the nature of power. Each morning after reading, he rode to the training fields and practiced swordplay with his soldiers. When asked why a sultan would do such a thing, he replied, "The pen teaches me the world, but the sword reminds me it is still dangerous." And so, in Mehmed II, history found a rare harmony, a warrior philosopher, a poet king, one who understood that to rule men, one must know both their minds and their souls. In the quiet nights, as Istanbul slept under the moon, Mehmed still read by the flicker of an oil lamp. The light fell across his face, not the face of a man who had conquered the world, but of one trying to understand why the world exists at all. For in the end, perhaps Mehmed's greatest conquest was not Constantinople, but knowledge itself, the one victory capable of lifting humanity beyond the limits of its own history. The shadow and the light, the West, awakens to a new world. When Istanbul rose again, the West still did not understand what had happened. The kings of Europe heard that Constantinople had fallen, and refused to believe their own messengers. A city once called the City of God, which had stood for over 1,000 years, had been brought down in just 7 weeks by a 21-year-old from the East. In Rome, Pope Nicholas V declared a day of prayer across Christendom. He called Mehmed II the Antichrist of the East, the one who would devour Christianity. But when he summoned Europe to another crusade, no one answered. The continent was exhausted from wars, debts, and its own divisions. The kingdoms feared one another more than they feared the Ottomans. And while they argued, Mehmed moved. He did not allow victory to make him idle. Only months after taking Constantinople, Mehmed sent emissaries across Europe, not to boast, but to measure. He wanted to know the strength of both friend and foe. His letters to the kings of Hungary, Venice, and Genoa carried no threats, only calm words, peace or war. I leave it to you to choose. But beneath that composure lay a strategy as sharp as steel. Mehmed never trusted in long peace. He knew that power never stands still. He fortified the Balkan frontiers, reclaimed abandoned fortresses, and built defences along the Danube, each stronghold another eye watching toward Europe. The West trembled. Monks thundered from pulpits about the Devil's Turk. But Mehmed paid no mind to names. He called them men who sleep in the glory of the past. To him, Europe was not a threat. It was a chessboard, and he had already moved the first pieces. In 1454, Ottoman forces advanced into Serbia, capturing Novo Brdo, the richest silver mine in the region. Venice, alarmed, sent envoys to Istanbul to negotiate. A Venetian merchant later described the meeting. The young Sultan sat in a black robe within his newly built palace, speaking fluent Greek, his eyes colder than iron. When we spoke of peace, he replied, I love peace, but only the peace that comes from my hand. To Mehmed, war was not chaos. It was a language of order. He fought not from hatred, but from necessity. If I stop, he said, Europe will come knocking at my door. Better that I knock first. So he moved. Through Bosnia, Albania, and the Peloponnese, tightening his grip until Ottoman banners brushed the edge of Central Europe. Yet he also knew that to confront the West, he needed its knowledge. He sent agents to Venice and Florence to buy books, maps, and ship models. In his workshops, Italian blueprints were studied and reimagined. His foundries refined European cannons, and his shipwrights redesigned Venetian hulls. An Ottoman general once said, we learn from them, then make them fear what they taught. From Istanbul, Mehmed wrote letters to the Italian city-states, including Florence, long before the birth of Leonardo da Vinci. I will not conquer Europe by faith, he wrote, but by intellect. Teach me what you know, and I will teach you what you have forgotten. The words spread through Europe like a prophecy. Some feared him, others were fascinated. Venetian merchants returned to Istanbul. Exiled Greek scholars sought refuge at his court. They called him the King of Two Suns, one shining over east, the other over west. But every light casts a shadow. As his power expanded, so did the hatred that followed. In churches across Europe, new maps were drawn, Istanbul circled in red, marked as the heart of the Eastern menace. Mehmed knew. But each night, as he stood on his palace terrace gazing at the sea, he said softly to his vizier, "They fear because they do not yet understand. One day they will come here, not with armies, but with knowledge." And perhaps he was right. Only decades later, as the light of the Renaissance spread across Europe, many of its seeds, maps, manuscripts, and mathematical ideas had once passed through the libraries of Mehmed II. While the West argued over whether he was demon or genius, Mehmed simply smiled. For he knew that empires fade, but ideas, if powerful enough, can conquer where swords never will. The conqueror of the sea, Mehmed's second horizon. After Constantinople became the beating heart of his empire, Mehmed II no longer looked eastward. He looked toward the sea. From the balcony of Topkapi Palace, where three waters met, the Bosporus, the Golden Horn, and the Marmara, he realized that true power did not rest on land alone. "He who rules the sea," he said, "rules the world." With those words, the Sultan opened a new chapter in Ottoman destiny, the age of the sea. In the mid-15th century, the Mediterranean was a chessboard of empires. To the west, the Italian city-states, Venice and Genoa, controlled the arteries of trade that connected Europe to the east. To the south and east, Muslim fleets from Egypt and North Africa commanded the warm waters of their coasts. Mehmed saw in that vast expanse not just wealth, but a knowledge, a bridge between civilizations. He understood that the Ottoman Empire would only become truly great when it conquered not merely cities or nations, but the heart of the sea where all roads meet. In 1455, just 2 years after Constantinople's fall, he ordered the construction of a new navy at the Tersain-i Amir shipyards on the Golden Horn, a complex that would become the largest dockyard in the world. Thousands of craftsmen, engineers, and slaves worked day and night, hammering iron, bending timber, weaving sails. The clang of metal and the scent of tar filled the air. From those fires rose the first generation of Ottoman warships, swift, formidable, and elegant, like iron birds upon the waves. Mehmed refused to leave command to others. He personally studied the currents, the winds, and the stars. Greek and Genoese sailors were summoned to his court to draw maps and teach navigation. One of his officers later wrote, "Our Sultan reads more books of the sea than any admiral." Once, when I spoke of the winds of the Aegean, he pointed out the error on my own map. But Mehmed's ambitions reached beyond the shore. He dreamed of the Greek islands, and beyond them, Italy itself. His first great test was Rhodes, the fortress of the Knights of St. John, veterans of the Crusades who had fought his ancestors. In 1456, the Ottoman fleet surrounded the island. Cannons roared for weeks, but the stone bastions held. Mehmed withdrew, unshaken. "No fortress lasts forever," he said. "All it needs is time." And indeed, 70 years later, Rhodes would fall to his descendant, Suleiman the Magnificent. Turning southward, Mehmed then struck the Peloponnesus. He took Corinth, Mistras, and finally Sparta, the ancient land of warriors. Standing amid its ruins, he remarked, "All those who feared not death are now gone. Only the empire that learns from them will endure." The merchants of Venice began to panic. Their ships were seized, their routes across the Aegean cut off. In 1463, the Republic of Venice declared war, a conflict that would last 16 years, the Ottoman-Venetian War marking the dawn of a new era. An age of scientific warfare. Cannons replaced arrows, stone walls crumbled beneath the power of gunpowder. Mehmed did not command from afar. He visited the front lines, studied coastlines, and personally corrected maps for artillery positions. When an admiral asked why the Sultan concerned himself with such details, Mehmed replied, "The sea has no walls. To rule it, one must know every wave." The war was long and brutal, but it transformed the Ottoman navy. From Venice, they learned the art of shipbuilding, navigation, and maritime strategy. The Ottoman fleet became not only a weapon, but a floating academy where engineers, carpenters, and sailors grew together through fire and salt. In 1479, the war ended in uneasy peace. Venice kept its trade, but lost much of its territory. Mehmed had not conquered the entire Aegean, but he had achieved something greater: recognition. The Sultan declared, "I do not need Venice to bow. I only need them to look east each time they set sail." From that moment, the crescent moon flag began to appear across the Mediterranean, from Crete to Albania, from the Peloponnesus to the Egyptian coast. Travelers wrote that at sunset, the sea shimmered silver beneath the reflection of Ottoman steel, a vast tide of light and empire. Thus Mehmed II, once known as the conqueror of Constantinople, gained a new title, the Keeper of the Sea. Yet, even as his fleets grew, his gaze turned toward a different horizon, one not drawn on any map. He sought to conquer time itself, to build a legacy that would defy decay, outlive memory, and turn empire into eternity. For to Mehmed, land and sea were fleeting. What he truly desired was a dominion beyond boundaries, one not of conquest, but of the mind and the ages themselves. The architect of order, Mehmed II, and the law of empires. After conquering both land and sea, Mehmed II turned to something far less visible, yet infinitely more powerful: the architecture of order. He understood that no empire could live forever on the edge of a sword. "A nation that lives by victory," he said, "will die by victory. But a nation built upon law will live with time itself." Beginning in 1460, the Sultan set out to craft what would become the first comprehensive legal code of the Ottoman Empire, the Kanun-name-i Ali Osman, or simply the Kanun of Mehmed. It was revolutionary. While most of the medieval world still bowed to the authority of divine law, Mehmed forged a secular code, one that would exist beside Islamic Sharia, not beneath it. The Kanun covered every aspect of life: taxation, land, commerce, religion, administration. Its language was clear, its tone pragmatic, the law of men, not of angels. To the scholars of his court he explained, "The Quran is the light of God, but the Kanun is the bridge of man. Light cannot cross the abyss without a bridge." His first reform was land management. Unlike Europe, where feudal lords owned vast estates, the Ottomans granted land only in exchange for service. Soldiers, governors, and farmers held their fields conditionally, abandon it, and the land returned to the state. It was a radical design, an empire that could expand without birthing aristocracy. In trade, Mehmed showed the same clarity. He issued decrees protecting foreign merchants, Venetians, Genoese, Armenians, Jews, allowing them tax exemptions and guaranteeing their safety. "They bring us gold and knowledge," he said. "We give them peace." Under his reign, commerce became not a privilege, but a shared heartbeat that connected continents. Inside his court, Mehmed reinvented administration itself. He created two major institutions, the Divan Humayun, the Imperial Council, and the Chancery, where every decree was recorded and sealed with the Sultan's signet. No command could be issued without documentation. "A ruler," he declared, is only truly powerful when even his own words are bound by law. But perhaps the boldest and most dangerous of his reforms was the separation of religion and state. In an age when faith and power were inseparable, Mehmed dared to draw a line between them. "If I am the ruler of Muslims, Christians, and Jews," he said, "then my justice must stand higher than their faith." He placed the ulama, the religious scholars, under the authority of the state. They would advise but not govern. It was unprecedented, a secularized empire within the heart of the medieval Islamic world, where Sharia and Qanun coexisted not as rivals, but as partners in order. He reorganized the empire into provinces, sanjaks and regions, vilayets, each led by governors accountable directly to the throne. None could rule autonomously. Rebellion died before it could breathe. Through this lattice of governance, Mehmed created what many historians would later call the most efficient state machine of the pre-modern world. Yet, for all its precision, Mehmed's justice was not without mercy, nor without steel. Once a stone mason accused a provincial governor of stealing his materials. The court summoned both men. Mehmed attended the trial in person. When the judge asked, "What do you have to say in your defense, my Sultan?" Mehmed replied, before the law, "I am but a man among men." The governor was found guilty, the mason compensated. Word spread through the empire, and the people began to call him Adil Sultan, the just king. But justice, to Mehmed, also demanded discipline. He believed that mercy without limit was cruelty in disguise. The weakness of one man, he said, may become the tragedy of thousands. When a general conspired against him in the Balkans, Mehmed ordered the execution of the entire family line. It was harsh, but no one rebelled again. In him, intellect and iron coexisted like flame and forge. The Qanun was more than a body of laws. It was a philosophy of civilization. It taught that justice, not conquest, was the core of power, that the throne stood not above the law, but within it. And through that vision, Mehmed built not merely an empire, but an idea, one strong enough to endure 5 centuries after his death. In his final years, the aging Sultan told a student, "An empire survives not because it is loved, but because it is believed to be just." And perhaps that is why, centuries later, his name still echoes, not only as the conqueror of Constantinople, but as the architect of order, the man who taught the world that between the sword and the word, the law must always speak last. The last conquest, Mehmed II and the price of power. At the height of his glory, when the Ottoman Empire stood unmatched in might and reach, Mehmed II faced his most silent enemy, the shadow of his own power. Because power, once grasped too tightly, always casts a long shadow. And in that shadow, secrets, fears, and silent wounds began to bloom. Like embers hidden beneath ash. Mehmed was a man who never believed in luck. He believed in men, but never fully trusted any of them. After the fall of Constantinople, the Sultan grew quieter, more withdrawn. Those who had once seen his eyes gleam with the fire of conquest now saw something different. The weary glint of a man who understood that to hold a throne, one must sometimes crush what one loves most. Whispers filled the palace halls. The same generals who had marched beside him from Edirne, who had shared in the thunder of cannons at Theodosius's walls, now turned against one another, divided by ambition, by envy, by the scent of gold and glory. Mehmed would listen to their debates without a word, his gaze cold and still. When silence finally fell, he would simply say, "An empire never falls to its enemies. only to those who cannot stop speaking of victory. Then he began to act. Veteran commanders were dismissed, others vanished overnight. The air in the palace grew thin, heavy with suspicion. The sound of footsteps in the corridors became as light as whispers, and those who once thought they understood Mehmed came to realize no one truly did. But the greatest struggle he faced was not with his generals. It was with his own blood. By Ottoman law, every prince had the right to inherit the throne, and with that right came a curse. When a sultan died, his sons would slaughter one another for power. It had happened before, and it would happen again, unless someone broke the cycle. So Mehmed did what no ruler before him dared. He wrote a law, a single, chilling decree. For the preservation of world order, the heir to the throne may lawfully put his brothers to death. Cold words, forged from the deepest fear. The fear that what he built might crumble the moment he closed his eyes. People called it cruel. Few understood that he was choosing between two evils, the death of one or the civil war of millions. "I was not born to be loved," he said once. "I was born to keep chaos still." In his later years, Mehmed grew increasingly alone. He no longer attended feasts. He stopped reading poetry aloud. The lights of his library still burned late into the night, but his interests had changed, no longer philosophy or astronomy, but religion, death, and time. Perhaps he knew what all conquerors eventually learn, that from the summit of triumph one sees the abyss most clearly. In 1480, he prepared for what would be his final campaign, the invasion of Italy. His goal was not gold, it was Rome, the heart of the faith that had once called him demon. He dreamed of raising the crescent moon above St. Peter's Basilica, of uniting East and West under one empire. Europe trembled. But before the fleet could sail, the Sultan fell ill. On his last night, attendants found him awake, sitting upright, maps spread before him. His hand trembled, but his eyes remained steady. He whispered, "I opened the gates of the East. Only one step remained to touch the West." Then he closed his eyes. Outside, thunder broke over the Marmara Sea. Rain fell on Istanbul for 7 days and 7 nights, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the end of an age. When his body was prepared for burial, his servants found a folded piece of paper tucked inside his robe. On it, one sentence, written in his own hand. "When I am gone, do not say the empire has lost its king. Say it has lost its balance." Because Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, had never been merely a warrior. He was the bridge between two worlds, forged with blood, intellect, and the unbearable solitude of a man who knew that every crown is also a chain. And in that solitude he left behind a question, soft as wind, heavy as eternity. Can one conquer the world without losing oneself? The Last Dawn, the legacy of Mehmed II. When Mehmed II died in the spring of 1481, silence fell over the Ottoman Empire. No drums, no cheers, only the sound of prayer from mosques and from churches alike. For the first time in memory, the calls of the muezzin and the toll of Christian bells rose together, two faiths mourning one man. It was as if, for a brief and fragile moment, both East and West stopped breathing, unsure of what exactly they had lost, but knowing it could never be replaced. News of his death spread like wildfire. In Venice, people rejoiced. In Rome, the Pope ordered 3 days of bells to thank God. And yet, beneath their celebration, even they knew the truth. With Mehmed's passing, the Middle Ages had ended. He had not merely conquered Constantinople, he had conquered the limits of the human world as it was known. In Istanbul, his funeral was solemn and unadorned. His body was carried through the stone streets he had rebuilt, past the markets he had reopened, beneath the walls he had restored. People, Muslim, Christian, Jew, lined the roads, heads bowed. Some wept, some stood silent, but all understood. They were not burying a king. They were laying to rest the man who had turned their city from ashes into the heart of the world. His tomb was built on the high hill behind the Fatih Mosque, the mosque of the conqueror. There were no grand inscriptions, no golden epitaphs, only a single line. Mehmed Khan, son of Murad, the one who opened the gates of Constantinople. Simple, calm, just like the man himself. But Mehmed's true monument was not carved in stone. It lived in the idea he left behind. Under his reign, empire ceased to mean mere land or conquest. It became a vision, a fusion of culture, faith, and knowledge. He created something the world had never seen, a state that was both Islamic and secular, both warrior and scholar, a place where mosques, churches, and libraries could stand on the same street, under the same sky. After him, the Ottoman Empire continued to grow. His successors, Bayezid II, Selim I, and Suleiman the Magnificent, followed his path. They extended the empire to Egypt, Persia, Hungary, and North Africa. But in every victory, one name was always spoken first: Mehmed. Not only as the man who began it all, but as the soul of the empire itself. His influence reached beyond power, into the heart of human thought. From his court, Greek scholars fled westward, carrying ancient manuscripts of Aristotle, Plato, and Ptolemy, texts Mehmed had once commissioned and preserved in Istanbul. Those manuscripts would help ignite the Renaissance in Europe. And so, in a twist of history's irony, the man once called the Antichrist of the East became one of the silent midwives of Europe's rebirth. Later, historians in the West would write, "If not for Mehmed, perhaps Florence would never have found Aristotle, Leonardo would never have drawn, and Copernicus would never have seen the stars. He had not just conquered a city, he had opened an age." In Ottoman chronicles, he was remembered as Fatih Sultan Mehmed, the king who opened the gates. But to those who lived under his reign, he was something more. To Muslims, he was the fulfillment of the Prophet's hadith. One day, Constantinople will be conquered. Blessed is the ruler who achieves it. To the Greek Christians, he was the one who ended an era but kept memory alive. In Persian poetry, they called him the seventh star of the world. In Europe, he was the Alexander of the East. And yet, of all his titles, one truth endures. He was the first to understand that intellect and power are inseparable, that knowledge must guide the sword, and that empire without wisdom is only ruin delayed. Years later, travelers visiting his tomb would swear that on certain moonlit nights, when the wind passed through the courtyard of the Fatih Mosque, they could hear a faint sound, like steel striking steel, the echo of a sword being reforged. The people of Istanbul whispered that it was his spirit, still guarding the city he had loved more than life itself. And perhaps if that spirit truly remains, it stands again upon those ancient walls where once he uttered the words that history would never forget. There is no such thing as impossible, only those who do not believe enough. So even now, centuries later, when the morning sun strikes the dome of Hagia Sophia, Istanbul still speaks his name, not in words, but in light, a whisper carried through time. Mehmed, the one who opened the door between two worlds so that humankind might walk through. and sea itself. Eternal city, Istanbul, the heart between worlds. Years after the death of Mehmed II, the city he rebirthed still held the world's gaze. Istanbul lived with two souls, one belonging to the east, one to the west. Yet instead of colliding, they breathed together in an uncanny rhythm. Each morning, the call to prayer from the minarets rose into the sky, entwining with the chime of church bells echoing through the old Greek quarters. And above it all, doves circled the dome of Hagia Sophia. Once a church, then a mosque, now a symbol of something greater than either faith, the coexistence of both. That was Mehmed II's truest legacy, a city sustained by the memory of all humankind. Under his successors, Istanbul was more than the Ottoman capital. It was the mind of the world. Merchants from India arrived with spices and pearls, scholars from Persia brought poetry and philosophy, engineers from Italy carried tools and blueprints, and Jewish families, fleeing the Inquisition in Spain, found refuge and safety within its walls. Along the waterfront, the air hummed with languages, Turkish, Greek, Arabic, Latin, blending into a single tongue, the language of exchange and understanding. Istanbul became a reflection of Mehmed's idea, the strength of diversity. He once said, "A city is only truly great when it holds many voices yet still sings in harmony." And indeed, from the 16th century onward, there was no other place on earth like it. Its bazaars stretched like mazes, where Indian saffron lay beside Italian silk, where Jewish traders sold Greek manuscripts to Arab students. In this great symphony of life, every difference found its place, as long as it contributed to the shared breath of the city. People said Istanbul under the Ottomans was like a grand composition, each district a note, each person a rhythm, and Mehmed II the first composer. Though long gone, his spirit remained, in every stone, every tree, every shadow along the ancient walls. Travellers from Venice and Florence wrote of a place unlike any other, where faith and reason coexisted, where Muslims and Christians could share tea by the Bosporus without needing to argue which god was greater. Hagia Sophia, the city's eternal heart, continued to evolve. Ottoman architects strengthened its Byzantine dome, added minarets, yet preserved its structure, a balance between reverence and renewal. When sunlight streamed through its hundreds of windows, glinting across marble floors, visitors often said it felt like stepping into a realm where time and belief dissolved. A Western traveller once wrote, "In this place I do not know whether I stand in a church or a mosque. Perhaps I stand between two worlds." And that, more than conquest or empire, was Mehmed's dream fulfilled, a city belonging to no single faith, yet welcoming to all, a vision centuries ahead of its time. While Europe tore itself apart in religious wars, Istanbul was already living what the world still struggles to imagine, a harmony of difference. Centuries passed, the empire grew old, new sultans rose and faded, yet when each ruler walked the stone path between Topkapi Palace and Hagia Sophia, they tread the same road Mehmed had once paved, the road between power and faith. And the people would whisper, "When a sultan walks that path, he does not walk in the present, he walks through history itself." Through all its changes, names, rulers, borders, one ritual endured. Each morning, the people of Istanbul still lifted their eyes to the dome of Hagia Sophia, to the first light of the sun spilling over its marble face, because deep within they knew, as long as that light touched the stone, the spirit of the city and of Mehmed II still lived. And so Istanbul remains eternal, luminous, a city of two worlds, where East no longer opposes West, but mirrors it. A place where humanity can finally see itself, reflected on both sides of history. The whisper of eternity, the immortal legacy of Mehmed II. The 16th, 17th and 18th centuries drifted by, the world changed, borders shifted, empires rose and fell like tides. Yet the name Mehmed II never sank into silence. It did not survive in decrees or royal charters, but in stories, songs and memory, in the quiet rhythm of humanity's collective remembrance. Because there are some men who, though long dead, continue to shape the way the world remembers both its past and itself. The people of Istanbul still tell their children that when storms break over the Marmara Sea, when thunder rolls across the Bosporus, the spirit of Fatih Sultan Mehmed rides again, his sword flashing within the lightning. And on calm nights, if one stands upon the Galata Bridge beneath a full moon and looks toward Hagia Sophia, one might see the faint outline of a man in a black cloak standing between two worlds, East and West. He does not speak, he does not smile, he simply gazes into the distance where the stars shimmer upon the water. But beyond legend lies a deeper truth. Mehmed II became the symbol of a mind that conquered itself. To Muslims, he was proof that faith could walk hand in hand with reason. To the West, he became the doorway between civilizations, where force and art, war and philosophy, power and compassion could coexist in one being. After his death, the Ottoman Empire endured not only through its armies and territories, but through the intellectual seeds he had sown. The scholars he supported founded new schools, translated manuscripts, and taught mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. From Istanbul, that current of knowledge flowed south to Cairo and Damascus, westward to Venice, Florence, and eventually Paris. In European libraries, even centuries later, one can still find manuscripts stamped with Mehmed's seal. Small, delicate marks, yet carrying the weight of a vision that transcended its time. Centuries after his passing, his name still echoed in the minds of those who understood power. Napoleon Bonaparte, studying maps with his generals, once said, "Remember Mehmed." The conqueror is not the man with the largest army, but the one who knows when to strike and when to stop. For beyond the title Conqueror of Constantinople, Mehmed II was the architect of rebirth. He proved that knowledge knows no borders, that faith cannot imprison the mind, and that power holds meaning only when it lifts humanity higher. If the West remembers Leonardo, Michelangelo, or Galileo as the heralds of the Renaissance, then in the East, Mehmed II was the one who laid the foundation for that awakening, the moment when the human mind began to see itself anew. Like all who become legend, his life has since been wrapped in half-truths and myths. Some say he never truly died, that his spirit still lingers in the city, hidden in the murmur of prayers and the sound of the waves beneath the bridges. Others say that when a child in Istanbul looks up at Hagia Sophia and asks, "Who created this wonder?" the wind itself answers in a whisper, "Fatih." Even today, amid the towers and lights of the modern metropolis, one of Istanbul's great districts still bears his name, Fatih, the opener. It is not merely a place but a living memory, a pulse of the past woven into the present. Every street there leads in one way or another to Hagia Sophia. Every dome, in its curve, reflects a fragment of his soul. And if Mehmed could see the world now, fractured by borders, divided by pride, still repeating the same ancient lessons, perhaps he would smile, not with triumph, but with sorrowful knowing. For he understood what few rulers ever did, that mankind can break walls, rebuild them, and yet never learned to conquer its own heart. That, perhaps, was the final victory he sought, not won by the sword, but by understanding. A day may come when humanity realizes that every civilization is but a different chapter of the same eternal book. Only then, perhaps, will the shadow of Mehmed II finally rest. Until that day, when night falls over the Bosporus, when the moonlight glides across the water, and the dome of Hagia Sophia glows like an ancient pearl, history still whispers, softly, unendingly, Mehmed never truly left. He is only waiting for humankind to finish its lesson.